Welcome to episode 64 of Fizzy's Wacky World of Wrestling, Night of the Living Fools. Happy April Fool's Day, folks! And for those of you who are old viewers or those who have coming into the podcast for the very first time, welcome to Fizzy's Wacky World of Wrestling, the experimental podcast stream involving the insane world of professional wrestling. My name is William Fizzpatrick, and, well, so September 2019, huh? Was supposed to be back by then. So, the very first question you're probably going to be asking at this point is the following: where the heck have you been, Fizz? Well, I'll answer that question. It's actually a lot of different questions, but first, let me showcase to you what I have available right now. First, I have this whole new setup with the Apple of Discord alongside my new OBS software streaming program, and this was the first major thing that was the issue for broadcasting future Wacky World of Wrestling episodes. At the time, Google Hangouts was shutting down, and unfortunately for me, that meant that my only source of streaming options was gonna be inactive and not available anymore unless I did some changes to my setup, which also included possibly bringing in a webcam. That obviously didn't happen. So August rolls around, Hangout shuts down, and I'm in a situation where I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to update my hardware. And it wasn't just involving grabbing a webcam, it was also a situation in which I would have to upgrade my PC. I wasn't in the position at the time to upgrade my PC from a retro system that my dad literally made out of a box of scraps. Yes, Iron Man isn't the only person to have made a PC or a suit of armor out of a box of scraps at this point. So, with this retro system, which is a solid system, I just didn't want to tax it, especially given the fact that taxing the system would result in possibly me having issues down the line. It also didn't help that I was having a power problem with the thing, which turned out to be the power supply box had started shorting out. So now I'm in a situation where I have an upgraded PC. When my folks decided to upgrade their PC, I was given the Cube. And this thing is a literal beast that could give Brock Lesnar a run for its money in terms of the capabilities of this system and the power that it has. I'm currently at a CPU speed of about between 3.5 and 4.4 at 30 frames per second. That's how good this thing is. So now I also have my OBS software, which is open broadcast software, alongside the Apple of Discord. So this fixed my audio and visual issues that I was having on the show. So this means that Wacky World of Wrestling is back to the capacity that it was previously, and there's some additional improvements if you haven't noticed the screen already. Yes, welcome to the Wacky World billboard, as it is. It's going to frequently change over the broadcast over the next couple of weeks here. I have a couple of different, just some basic images made with Windows 3D Paint plastered onto the front of a wall. And yes, it's a Wacky World of Wrestling live stream. And yes, I just decided, so the next question should probably be asked is, hey Fizz, why did you decide to come back? Well, like I said, I had originally planned on coming back in September. But the problem was with the hardware issues, in addition to some burnout that I was dealing with, because 2019 for me was possibly the one year where I ended up sick more often than any other year that I had previously had. I was sick for 12 weeks of 2019 total. I counted all of the weeks that I was ill. And it just dawned on me that it would be a good idea to take a break, get over these minor medical ailment issues that I was having, and get back to doing podcasting when I felt like the time was right to do so. Originally, I was going to re-debut in 2020. In fact, I had started making a bit of a push to do that sort of thing. That didn't work out the way I expected it to, so instead, I ended up changing my strategy and going, all right, looks like it's going to be 2021 or so. And I was exploring my options, and then two little birdies from one of the podcasts that I had helped start, Shooting the Breeze, came to me with a solution. Or more specifically, the old man began badgering me to the point of, "Hey, Fizz, when you gonna open up yourself a Discord?" And my response was, "Okay, let's do this." Because Taker and Senju had needed help with the sumo shows, and I have done the sumo show broadcast for Shooting the Breeze for the last several years, since 2019 plus. And it's a situation where, because Senju, even though that he lives in Japan, he doesn't cover he isn't interested in sumo. He is into tokusatsu, he's into soccer, he's into New Japan Pro Wrestling, bless his soul, for how much of a disastrous tire fire that promotion has become. And basically, it's a situation where you need to bring in somebody who has knowledge of sumo wrestling and knows what the heck they're talking about to be able to bounce off of the old man and send you occasionally bringing up his thought processes of what exactly is going on in Japanese culture at that particular moment in time. And so around January of 2020, I joined up on Discord, and I found out that this thing is great for audio. And my audio quality, I noticed, was significantly better than what I had been using beforehand. So, like, overall, it was a situation of, this is going to be a situation of fantastic. This works. This is exactly what I need. This is exactly what I'm looking for. And then I got OBS software onto the Cube. I found out it worked extremely well. It barely eats up any of my CPU speed at this point, so it's a no-brainer. And basically, the idea became, all right, I'm going to re-debut on St. Patrick's Day. Pulled a muscle in my back the week of St. Patrick's Day. It was a minor back pull, and I go, oh, great. I'm going to have to delay this by a week or so. So I figured then I would be re-debuting on the, let me think here. I figured I'd be re-debuting on the 26th or the 27th. That didn't work. I ended up busy that particular week, and I went, all right. Obviously, the signs are pointing for me to maybe debut next week. And originally, I had thought that this Friday or this Saturday would be where I would be making my return to solo podcasting. Although, stay tuned, folks. It's probably going to be a bit more than just me on the broadcast for this show. So if you start hearing random voices, there might be some surprises, depending on how things go. So as I was going through my options, I realized that it would be a good idea 2 days before I came up with this show idea. I woke up and suddenly went, April Fool's Day is this week, the Day of the Fools. I figured, why not do a show on April Fool's Day? A day that nobody is expecting me to do any kind of podcast. I end up doing a surprise stream. For the very first time, I'm doing a podcast on air with this new setup. And it also gives me an opportunity to test and give feedback from viewers if they happen to come to the stream tonight to see what exactly is going on with the streams, to test the sound quality, to test the microphone quality, and to test whether or not the visuals are showing up on screen the way I have set them up. Now, I did some testing last night, and it seemed to work okay. But then again, it's just me doing a test stream, the night before a show, and it doesn't necessarily mean that everything is going to work out the way I expected it to. But overall, so I got the equipment issues were obvious, the health issues were obvious, and then, of course, there was the burnout. I think that Series 3 was one of my stronger series when it came to Wacky World of Wrestling. Of course, it's just me saying that. I've gotten some positive reception from other people about these shows and thought that they were relatively decent or relatively good. Um, but I also felt as though that because I had had so many absences because of my illness issues, I had had flus, I had an influenza issue, I had strep throat, everything that affected the way that I could do podcasting via my voice. It took me 6 months to get my voice back, basically, to a suitable level to do podcasting with. And it was a difficult situation for me. I really wanted to do creative stuff, and I'm in a position where I was stuck not being able to do anything creative. And that was really unfortunate for me. And overall, it's just this situation of I needed to, you know, I needed to take a step back and actually rethink and rediscover what I was missing as far as podcasting was concerned. Was I still interested in doing podcasting? Was I still interested in doing shows? And then I did the sumo shows for Shooting the Breeze, as I mentioned beforehand. And that whimsical, vibrant fire was back in full force. I was snarking, I was doing great segments, I was doing great beats with the two of them, and it just dawned on me that, hey, you still got that fire. You still have that, you still have it. You still have that skill, the gift of gab, as my mother calls it, to be able to do this wrestling podcasting stuff. Now, obviously, 2020 was a year in which it would have been a very bad idea for me to return to wrestling podcasting, even with the limited viewership that I have at the moment. It's not something I really worry about. I do these shows as a hobby, as for fun. And if I gain an audience, which, again, thank you so much for coming into this stream tonight or any of the future streams that I have planned for the next couple of weeks, um, it's a situation where I look at this and I go, okay, I need to think of a new plan. I need to think of a new strategy. And here we are. Here's the new plan. Here's the new strategy. Here's the new way of doing things, as it were. Some things are new, some things are old, but same old Fizz is right here doing, at the end of this microphone, doing my best to give you folks a good, entertaining experience whenever you decide to watch this show tonight or the next night after that. Okay, so technical issues, obviously. The health issues I had, obviously. And then, of course, the burnout that I was suffering from doing the solo shows alongside dealing with the illness issues. So 2020 hits. I do some occasional sumo shows for Shooting the Breeze, and it was a very fun experience, but I started feeling that vibrant fire around August, September of 2020. I do another sumo show for them in January. I also did the March Bash show recently, and it was a really grand, fun time. And, so many people have been very supportive of me and my creative ventures over the last few years. People like Senju, the old man, my parents, George from Two Guys One Sport. He's been incredibly encouraging. The wrestling MVP of 2020, Brandon Thurston of WrestleNomics. He's been incredibly encouraging. Rev Claire Elizabeth, one of my longest tenured friends in the world of professional wrestling, just celebrated her Trans Visibility Day yesterday. Has been one of my close friends and has been incredibly supportive of me in my podcasting ventures. Sean Reuter and K.M. Tierney, two people who gave me the opportunity when I started doing the shows on Cage Side Seats, the Cage Side Speaks shows that put my foot in the door, as it were, and basically kept me in the wrestling fandom during a time period where I was Not really sure if I was going to be continuing on with professional wrestling. I would have never gone into the indies, for example, if I'd done that. Or I would have probably gone in the indies, but it would not necessarily have been the same. I wouldn't have known so many people when I went into the independent scene in 2017 on a full-time basis to watch and cover the shows and do the broadcasts of Wacky World Series 1 with my former co-host Sal Cusimano. And overall, things are a lot better now. And things at the moment are, I didn't really mean to be so heavy about this. This is a very light and vibrant show, but overall, this year and the last year before that have been years where I was able to recover, finally physically recover. I barely got sick last year, which was a massive, massive plus for me. In a year of a pandemic, I only got sick 2 times last year, and both were very minor instances. Um, so overall, I'm feeling a lot better. I'm feeling vibrant. I'm feeling strong to talk about wrestling. So let's talk about what I'm going to be doing going forward with Wacky World of Wrestling, obviously. So, Fizz, when are the streams going to be happening? Answer, Fridays at 8 p.m. EST Standard Time. I plan on covering some of the local wrestling shows that I was not able to cover due to the Hangout shutdown, and there'll be nice retrospective shows to showcase the regional talent that is still here in the Western New York, Northwestern Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Canada areas of the country. I mentioned Thurston and WrestleNomics. There's a couple of matches of his that I haven't covered yet, as well as finally looking at Brandon and Company's whole home promotion. ESW. A promotion I have not covered on Wacky World of Wrestling yet. I have mentioned it before previously, but I went to one of their shows in 2019, the Falling Leaves Festival show. And that was an incredibly fun experience for me, but it was also the last independent wrestling show I went to before this pandemic shut everything down. Because, for those of you who don't know, folks, I'm from New York State. You know, I was born in PA, but I live in New York State, and New York State has some of the tightest regulations regards to professional wrestling and health and safety anywhere in the country. The amount of red tape that this place has is astounding, but there are positives. Even though there is a lack of work available for wrestlers at the moment, they are opening up slowly. New York State is opening up bars and events slowly due to the pandemic, and professional wrestling shows should be coming back within the next year or so, and next year, year and a half or so, and I will probably be able to watch local shows again. But at the moment, speaking of new technologies, I have been actually watching stuff on Pluto TV. They have an independent wrestling section to watch independent matches. And Beyond Wrestling's Uncharted Territory, which I talked about on the last episode of the show, has an archive of their series up on that stream on the Pluto Wrestling Pro Wrestling channel. And I've been able to watch the local wrestlers compete on Beyond Wrestling's Uncharted Territory shows. Thurston, Megabyte Ronnie, Daniel Garcia, Kevin Blackwood, Puff, and all the rest who have, and also Kevin Bennett, all competing. And speaking of local regional wrestlers making their debut, let's switch over to some brief wrestling news. Another regional wrestler who has been a staple of the Wacky World of Wrestling Indie Extravaganza shows is Big Time Bill Collier. And guess who made their debut on AEW this week? Yep, Bill Collier. He made his debut on AEW Dark Elevation against Jon Moxley, the former Dean Ambrose, in a squash match. He had a very competitive match with Ambrose, despite it being a squash, and it was an incredibly fun and enjoyable match, and my mother was really excited. One of the programming areas that my mother has been watching as the Buffalo Wrestlers and the Northwestern Pennsylvania Wrestlers have been debuting on AEW over the last several months. when Mega Bairani made his debut on AEW Dark against Brian Cage, what she did is she found the match via the official AEW page, went over to Facebook Live, started watching the match, found the timestamp. Somebody had actually timestamped the match beforehand, and she went to that match, watched it, then she came back, found the timestamp again, and showed the match to my dad for him to watch. Even though he's basically a non-fan, he's more into legitimate martial arts and stuff. Not MMA, but, 80s style martial arts. And he liked the match. He thought it was fine. He's more used to the traditional grappling styles of professional wrestling than the more artsy, flips and moves than that people do in these particular matches. So, overall, AEW has been a program that myself and my mom have really enjoyed over the last several months because we mostly watch the dark stuff. And dark is a programming, by the way. It's not something involving grim or grittiness. It is a program that covers a lot of squash matches. It basically reminds me of the WCW, WWF programs that would do these kind of squash matches, like WCW Worldwide. Velocity and Heat are two other ones that people know about. Those are the programs I generally like watching because I like watching the lower tier programs compared to, say, a Raw or a SmackDown or even an NXT. I like watching the kind of more open programs where there's, faces, heels, and of course your rogues gallery of jobbers for them to conquest against in the squared circle of life. And yes, I am conveniently aware of the fact that the squared circle of life has done pro wrestling things again. As I said before, I watched my stream of the last show I did before the hiatus, and I went, oh, I hate being right, I hate being right, I hate being right, I hate being right, because a number of things that I mentioned on the show actually ended up happening. In Chikara, there was a sex scandal. I mentioned that at the 16:30 mark of the broadcast that I thought that there might be a sex scandal in Chikara. Basically assuming that one was going to inevitably happen given the trajectory of the promotion. I did not think I was going to be right on that. And it has given me a headache because of that. I don't like being right about my hunches and assumptions about what is going on with any given promotion. And these assumptions are logical deductions into a pro wrestling promotion, how it's structured, what its hierarchy is, what talent is there, what's the history of that talent, has the talent been background checked, has the promoter been background checked? Very big red flag for those of you who know about me and know that I have a tendency to frequently check the backgrounds of every single individual I meet in pro wrestling. Yeah. So, yes, I have been keeping up with the Joneses and keeping up with the news about professional wrestling, how it seems to want to destroy itself on a weekly basis. As I've talked about in the past, it has this bizarro habit of doing this sort of thing, and it makes me go, what the heck? What the heck? What the heck? Are you trying to destroy yourself? Are you trying to make everybody hate you? Are you trying to make this all not work? I guess you are because, it's a situation where it just seems like everybody seems to want to try and self-destroy themselves again, which is weird to me. And overall, I just go, what is going on? Seriously, what is going on? And I mentioned this beforehand. One of the problems I saw with the indie wrestling scene, and a problem I could see coming about 50,000 miles away, was the lack of structure that these pro wrestling promotions and these wrestlers seem to have. I have said this before, but I've worked as an independent contractor before. I've worked as an independent contractor in merchandising since 2005. I am very, very professional. I dot my I's, cross my T's, put every single word into place. It's all professionally done and with a professionalism that is high marks, so that you don't really see these days. And when I look at these situations with professional wrestling, I go, why aren't certain things here? I know that pro wrestling sees itself as this outlaw, carny territory, but there are certain things that you can do to minimize the considerable, colossal amount of damage that happens when people go completely cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. I look at this situation and I go, of course this happens, because this person has been enabled to do this kind of bad behavior on a regular, consistent basis. And bad behavior has been something that has happened a lot over the last year and a half. See, when the pandemic hit, everybody who had been uncomfortable or had had incidents with wrestlers at pro wrestling shows, they got out of that toxic environment of the shows themselves, the after parties, which have a lot of alcohol and some questionable, goods that help stimulate most of the South American GDP economy. I'm being very vague there for a reason, but you should probably figure out what it is. They're out of that environment, and they're in a situation where they can now decompress, and suddenly it occurs to them that maybe these wrestlers had been touchy-feely with them and inappropriate, sexually harassing them and assaulting them, doing all sorts of horrible things. And then in the summer of 2020, everything exploded. In the middle of a pandemic, the speaking out movement happened, which was basically the Me Too movement, which happened in the film industry a few years ago, but for professional wrestling. There are dozens of names. There are dozens of accusations. There are dozens of incidents that have been covered. There have been multiple professional wrestling promotions that have closed. There have been multiple victims. There's been multiple suffering, pain, and agony. And for those of you who follow my Twitter, you may have noticed I haven't really talked about it. That's because I took the classical tactic of waiting. I want the victims to have as much space as possible to talk about their traumas, their pain, and their suffering. I will not interfere in that trauma, pain, or suffering. I will be incredibly sympathetic to their pain and suffering when necessary. If I know that victim personally in particular, okay, I have been super concerned for all of my friends in pro wrestling because of all of the trauma that has happened over the last year and a half. And it is trauma. It's trauma that has happened because of all of this. And so I spent the last year and a half, beyond resting myself up for an eventual return into this field, checking up on my friends, DMing them, seeing how they're doing. Are they doing okay? Because this pandemic is bad enough, but to see the thing that people had been using as a decompressant from the stresses of life, the conflicts, the agony, the pain, to turn into the literal monster that they had been trying to run away from, was awful for them to see them go through this. And because I have lived in a diversity situation time and time again, I was like, I'm not surprised that this happened. I mean, when you have these kind of individuals who come from these backgrounds, things like this are going to happen. It's unfortunate, it's tragic for the victims in these situations. And the fact that there aren't the kind of resources you'd think there would be in pro wrestling is surprising, but also not surprising, because pro wrestling, I noticed that the indie scene had been going on a bit of an anarchist bent over the last year and a half. Now, anarchy in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing in small doses. However, when you build your entire industry about not having a disciplined, concrete foundation for you to build upon over the next several years, and these things take several years because you're going to be working with people, objects, things, and each of them have to be very carefully built around in order for things to actually work. And there was the structural foundation of many independent wrestling promotions, and even the mainstream promotions, were badly set. The concrete wasn't filled right. The iron bars set around the concrete was loose or rusting. And obviously, the usual responses to these sorts of things have been the whole classic thing of, oh, let's just burn it all down. Oh, let's just forget about it. Let's just forget about it so that people are, are going to have to pick up our mess. Because that's what it is. When people say burn it all down, they're basically denying any responsibility that they had in creating the problem in the first place, and they're not going to want to fix it. Even the ones who have been strong advocates against people who were literal monsters, against victims of the accusations that happened during this whole situations, they're saying burn it down, but I'm like, hold on a second. You're basically claiming to me that you are wanting to fix this problem, but you're not going to want to take accountability and responsibility. Instead, you're going to do this whole self-pity routine. All it does is it makes me incredibly angry and frustrated because it doesn't fix the actual problem, which is you enabled the behavior in the first place. You brought in somebody who is extremely vulnerable and needs to be under constant care and supervision from a mental health care agency into this environment where you have allowed them near their vices and other things that are going to cause them to regress and fall off the wagon. They fall off the wagon, they end up hurting somebody, either themselves or somebody else who is incredibly vulnerable, and we end up with this vicious cycle of everybody basically playing the I don't want to touch the hot potato game. Instead of, actually doing some proper rebuilding and realizing that, hey, we maybe need to bring in some social service agencies to help with our mental health issues of our talent. And it's not just wrestlers, but referees, ringside crew, security, promoters themselves. All the stories and news, and I'm being as vague as possible about this for several reasons. First, obviously, is legal liability. There have been some very serious legal lawsuits by several wrestlers who have been outed and have been mentioned on this show previously, pulling legal action against people. When it's done, when they're doing legal action against people legitimately, you want to be extra careful about talking about them. I will say this, though. I'm not afraid of any of you monsters. You know that. I'm not afraid of any of you monsters at all. And that's the scariest thing alive. As George from Two Guys One Sport once said on the Golden Bull Awards of Shooting the Breeze, a quiet fizz is dangerous. I've been sitting back and I've been watching every statement, every word that victims, survivors, abusers, activist people, and everybody else in the pro wrestling world has been saying. I've been keeping an eye on everything. I have not been silent. I have been silent just because of the fact that I want the victims to speak out. I want them to speak out. I'm not going to turn this into a freaking bingo show where everybody has to basically stockpile in their trauma and try to get their voices heard about what they have suffered at the hands of pro wrestlers, promoters, and other people in this industry. I wanted to let the victims talk, and then, after some time has passed, then finally speak out myself about pro wrestling. I have been very lucky and very fortunate that my area of the woods has been in a rebuild mode for the last several years. I've been very fortunate to see people in my territory not get caught in the speaking out movement, that they were smart enough and sensible enough to not do any of the acts that had been previously mentioned in other territories. Areas that I had referred to as the Donner Parties of pro wrestling, yes, they turned out exactly as bad as I expected they would, and I hate being right. I hate being right about that. But that's the reality. This is the real world. Things like this happen. It's unfortunate. It is terrible to see. I'm not sure if I'm necessarily the right voice to say that, but I want to get that out there because it's been terrible to see an industry. I see posts all the time on the bird thing, Twitter, where people are so sad and so upset that they supported abusers that they didn't even know were abusers on the shows that they went to, especially in Britain, where it turns out that there has been a gosh-forsaken sex cult in that industry. Oh, lordy. I had major concerns about the British territory, and unfortunately, all of my concerns turned out to be exactly as justified and maybe even a little bit understated compared to what happened. Again, I'm like sitting here going, I can't believe this. I mean, look, I don't have inside sources, kids. Folks, I don't have inside sources. I use my gut intuition on a lot of occasions to think about logically going, this doesn't make any sense. The speech pattern that this person's saying doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense is the ringing thing that hits my head all the time when I think about these situations. And this is me going completely 100% unscripted, folks. This is why this speech has been sort of scattered. But when speaking out hit, I realized, okay, either I dedicate episodes of Wacky World of Wrestling without the current equipment that I need to this, or I let the victims talk about their experiences and their trauma and wait for things to die down a little bit before stepping into the ring myself and saying, what the heck is going on? Gah! It's anger-inducing, it's frustrating, it's incredibly laughable, some of the responses that people have said about this topic, when it is very clear that people got taken advantage of because wrestling is an industry where very vulnerable people from backgrounds that are as varied and tragic in some cases go to be the best version of themselves in most cases. They try to be something that they aren't, or they try to be something that they think they are, but they end up getting consumed by the beast. I've always talked about the beast. The beast is a very scary thing. You know, the nature of the beast is a very scary thing, and is something that you need to pay attention to when you're dealing with pro wrestling. That you have this situation where you have no idea if anything is actually going to end up being as it seems. Because everybody's trying to always work somebody. They're always trying to work each other. And I've always been disturbed by that aspect of pro wrestling. It's a situation where you can either get really mad about them working you, or you can figure out what they're saying through the Carney talk. And I choose to look through the Carney talk and see what they're saying. And a lot of times people realize, oh, you can't work this guy. He'll figure you out. Like nothing. And you know, my folks were just so, you know, my dad was very insistent on me being able to, was very insistent on me basically, you know, knowing that, okay, okay, son, you're getting into this industry. You know that this industry is really crooked and really corrupt. And I said, yes, I know that this industry is very crooked and very corrupt. but they also know that I'm a good person who is going to do the morally right thing and stop any kind of issues or any kind of problematic wrestlers who come into my neck of the woods, and reinforce good behavior done by people who know that they need to not do the kind of antics that I see on a regular basis, um, done by people in other territories, the Mid-Atlantic, California, the Midwest, some parts of Canada, Europe, especially in Britain, where there is a massive problem over there. But when the speaking out movement happened, I realized, okay, I need to take a step back. And as I said, I needed to let the victims talk. And I have the utmost sincere sympathy for their situation right now, as they're being legally sued by crazed wrestlers or promoters or personalities. And every single week it seems like somebody else is getting exposed for some kind of antics, or some kind of antics ranging from minor antics, to extremely disturbing graphic things that they have done with fans or other wrestlers. Oh, Lord. And I feel so thankful, but also so sad about the fact that it didn't happen here. It didn't happen in my neck of the woods. Fortunately, because my mother would have literally ripped people to shreds. She's a person who has been a humongous advocate for women's safety, for women and children's safety at venues, at sports venues. She wants safety for everybody. She wants everybody to be safe at the shows. She doesn't want them being intoxicated. She doesn't want them high. She doesn't want them in situations where it becomes a danger to themselves and others. You know, the protection of children is something that my family takes very seriously. So when I find out that a freaking pro wrestling promoter had allegedly is a grade level 2 sex offender who's promoting in New Jersey, you might guess that that gets my blood boiling a bit. Episode 43 is an episode that I, in hindsight and retrospect, I'm super proud of. That was the first time that I was on my own podcasting about these shows, and it was also the first time I got to talk about my experience of dealing with sex offenders. And when I heard that a promoter had somehow managed to mask his way into the pro wrestling industry, a promoter who was doing shows for Synergy Wrestling out in New Jersey, a show that I believe I briefly mentioned on one point or another, because it was a match, it was a show that was covered probably around the mid-30s or 40s of Wacky World of Wrestling, when when profiling somebody's indie experience, because Synergy had been a regular promotion for some of these wrestlers. They didn't know, most of them. And the ones who did know, oh yes, the eyes of Sauron are staring right down your throat, buddy. I've said this before and I'll say it again. I care about the safety of vulnerable individuals, women, and children at wrestling shows. Whether you be straight, minority, LGBT, or any other of the above, if you're a person who feels vulnerable or unsafe at wrestling shows, your safety is my top priority, because I want you to have a good time at these shows. These are supposed to be fun shows. And this industry decides, in its infinite wisdom, that, oh, we're not going to do that. We're going to, have ourselves a grand old time of, taking advantage of people, like we're some carnival circus freaks from the 1800s. It's not the carny days anymore, kids. It's the days where you have to realize that you have to rise above what people think of you and be a good overall person, a good human being. So many people have suffered over the last year and a half because of a pandemic, plagues, civil conflicts, and everything else in between. This year and last year were years where I decided I wasn't going to participate in that. I was going to build myself up to come back here. Because when I hear that a freaking sex offender has somehow managed to slip his way into the pro wrestling scene and promote shows, you better believe that that makes my blood boil with the hottest of hottest fire. Because I can look on my New York State sex offender registry and I'll find at least 20 to 50 sex offenders living within like 12 blocks of my house. It's a very uncomfortable feeling when you, as a child, are living in Jamestown and you have realized that you're not safe. And thank heavens for my parents keeping me safe. Thank heavens for my social media managers, aka my cats, my dog, and everything else when I was a kid, keeping me safe from the monsters of the world. But not everybody had that. Not everybody had that kind of protection. So when I hear that people who are LGBT or female or everybody else in between is being taken advantage of by monsters, you better believe that that gets my blood boiling. Makes me upset. Makes me driven. And this show is basically me reintroducing myself and saying, "Hi, I'm Fizzy, and I'm a world breaker." I'm very supportive of the people who have been good people in professional wrestling, people that I know as friends, people who I know as acquaintances, who have thankfully, as of this recording, not done anything to alert my presence. Because if I start seeing suspicious behavior, oh, you better believe my eyes will be dawned upon what you're doing. And I'll find out. It won't take very much. Because on this show, on the Day of the Fools, let me end this segment off by saying the following. My family doesn't suffer fools gladly. We destroy them. And on this Day of the Fools, this is a show in which I basically get to go on a tangential rant about speaking out. I am absolutely 100% supportive of the victims. I believe their claims. I hope that they get the right kind of legal consultation that they need to be able to process this. And that hopefully things work out for the better. Because goodness gravy, if there's one industry that needs to be supportive of the vulnerable out there, it's pro wrestling. Because this is the industry where people who don't fit in anywhere else can find a home, can find a center, can find a balance to be good people and not be stuck in a position where they're perceived as inferior. So, yeah. I will be talking, obviously, more about this in greater detail in coming shows, by the way. Because, obviously, at this point, I just want to get that out there on the ground floor that this is something I do not approve people doing, these offensive, horrific actions. And that I have been quiet for the last year and a half with some vague tweets of me basically going out and getting my tree trimming scythe out to basically say that I really am sorry for your pain, for what you've had to deal with over the last year. You have allies, you have friends, you have people who are supportive of you, okay? The one piece of advice I'm going to tell you in this situation, if you're in a legal situation with one of these abusers, you really need to consult legal advice from the right people. And thankfully, there have been people and there have been victories recently against people who have abused the legal system to try and get people to shut up about their claims and accusations. Yes, that's a thing that happens, and has happened. But overall, that was definitely something that was very upsetting. And it was something that I knew was going to happen. Unlike many people in the industry, I was aware that there were certain people who were suspect characters. I didn't have the full story. I didn't have the full information. I didn't go digging for the full story or full information. Just basic inquiries about, hey, this person seems a bit strange or a bit off. What is their deal? What is their issues? And some of them turning out to be total monsters wasn't a surprise to me because I had a lot of suspicions about them. Very first one that got exposed, I had a lot of suspicions about. But I didn't say anything because I know that was going to be a battle I'd lose. Plain and simple. And, it's a situation where I was like, I'm offended by this person's gimmick. He's a person who I legitimately could not watch his matches. Even before he got exposed, I legitimately could not watch his matches in high definition, because they would literally make me almost vomit. No other wrestler had managed to do that, but this particularly hairy wrestler gave me some real queases and pains and almost made me throw up on a couple of occasions. And I mentioned this to a few people. And it's like, so it should come as no surprise when he got outed. But the thing was, because this wrestler... Okay, come on, you know who this person is. It's Star of Dave. And I use his name backwards because of, well, that obvious reason. But I was deeply offended by Star of Dave. His gimmick overall gave me really icky vibes. Because, folks, those of you who might remember my past broadcasts may have mentioned something on previous broadcasts. I'm Romanian Jewish. Yes, my family went through... Half of the family escaped. The other half of the family ended up being baked in pies in concentration camps in World War II. So, when I see somebody who looks like they're culturally appropriating the look of a Holocaust victim, and if his family has dealt with Holocaust victim stuff, then yes, I completely understand. But the way he went about it just made my spine go, this is really uncomfortable. And I never said a thing about it until now. But him looking like a disheveled, hairy Holocaust victim, when he himself had never went through the Holocaust, because he was born around my age, unless he transported himself back to the 40s. And this is a situation where his gimmick started, where a fan who was a neo-Nazi screamed at him and said some offensive verbiage. I bet that the neo-Nazis and everybody else around him is basically saying, why did you encourage him? I mean, he ended up being a bigger monster and technically kind of a bigger, deal when he did that. Because he had a negative reputation in the New Jersey area. From every time I've seen him mentioned, it is a lot of very negative words. Very negative words from the people I have seen talk about him. My experience was, this is a guy who's very combative, very abusive, constantly would rattle on about unionization, despite the fact that I go, hold on a second. If this guy is screaming for unionization, then A, he's the wrong person to have as the face of your wrestling union, because this is the kind of middle manager personality who takes advantage of a union, takes advantage of the people around them, and takes advantage to do unscrupulous behavior while acting as the face of the people. And that's how I felt about this whole situation with Star of Dave being involved in this push for a wrestlers union. Because I thought, if this guy screws up, which he inevitably will, because he has that kind of personality, he's a psychopath. Okay, psychopaths inevitably want to destroy themselves. I thought, if this union succeeds, great. It means that there's more benefits to the wrestlers. If this union fails, it will be on him and everybody else around him. Even people who have no allegations against them, which is unfortunate. Because they have to suffer from what the fool did. And they have to suffer for what their ideology brought down upon them. Because they didn't think and use their awareness skills to think, is this person trying to use this union as a smokescreen to get what he wants? And apparently, Star of Dave's thing was that he was a sex addict. And he had a number of inappropriate affairs, abusive relationships, from what the allegations have said about him. And if I'm missing anything, it's probably because everything has congealed into this massive monster of allegations, because there were so many different allegations thrown against so many different people. A lot of them are most likely, and keep in mind, this is only through primary, secondary, or third sources, from the sources saying that there were accusations against this individual. Please keep in mind, these are accusations, obviously from a legal standpoint, although a lot of them are, from what I can understand, are accurate. But yeah, that just doomed the union right there. I guess part of me is really angry and upset because, as I've said before, I have a higher standard for independent wrestling than I do for mainstream wrestling. I can expect Vince McMahon to ride around naked in Saudi Arabia on a camel while dangling around the recently removed heads of his enemies. So, the idea that Vince causing an Arab Spring in Saudi Arabia was not a far-fetched stretch for the imagination, or something else happening in any of these other promotions. But when it happens to the indies, I went, oh, their constant boasting that they were better than the big promotions really got on my nerves, because I went, you're telling a half-truth there, okay? You're telling a half-truth, and the other side of it is a bold-faced lie. Because what you're really meaning to say is, oh, we're doing this thing, and we're like, are you really? Are you really? Of course, there's a lot of doubt that creeps into the mind when you look at these statements at face value and go, okay, where are the contradictions? Where are the contradictions? Where are the lies in the statement? What's going on here? And then you start digging and you start seeing the truth, the actual truth. And the truth and honesty is something that scares a lot of people in the wrestling industry. Truthful honesty is something that scares them. It is literally like them staring in the eyes of the devil. Because that tells you exactly what's going on and what this person is trying to do. I mean, I apologize if this is sounding, this is sounding tangential, but speaking out was a big reason as to why I stepped away a little bit longer than I intended to just look at the situation around me, plan, think about what I was going to say, and hopefully the words would come out right when I would be able to talk about this. Because this has affected promotions big and small, little and tiny, tiny and large. And everybody has suffered for it. It's as if the masochists have come home to roost, or the sadists have come home to roost. It's ridiculous, but with this show, and the shows I'll be talking about in the next couple of weeks, obviously I'm going to spread this out as the news stories develop, because there seems to be a new one of these every week. The big one was, of course, the sex offender thing that happened in New Jersey. Now, for those of you unaware, New Jersey does not have an athletic commission. New Jersey does not have a lot of regulation when it comes to professional wrestling. It's New Jersey, okay? It's a state that literally lives and breathes with this basically cavalier pirate mafia attitude towards anything involving organization or business. It's not really capitalist, because I don't think there's any capitalist alive who'd even want to settle down in New Jersey because of how corrupt the place is. It's a city that literally breathes on... It's a state that literally breathes on corruption most of the time. And the pro wrestling scene has managed to benefit from that non-regulatory, and this is something I had mentioned beforehand, why there hadn't been any regulation of pro wrestling. Now, some states are too stringent about their regulations. Other states are not stringent enough with their regulations. Hello, New Jersey, Indiana, Texas, California, and of course, the king of all the regulatory, non-regulation states, Florida. Although Georgia, Arizona, and Colorado are also inching up closer to Florida in terms of trying to knock the Florida person king off of its crown. And I've talked about this before, but regulation was one of the things that was going to inevitably happen. It was not going to make people who want this artsy, strong, free-willed, free-spirited, independent scene... it was not going to make them too happy when that ends up happening, because regulation ends up just destroying a lot of this nonsense instantly, because you now have somebody keeping an eye on the situation, and if they're actually doing what they're supposed to be doing, that's often the problem. Is a lot of times people will be doing something and they will actually not be doing the thing that they're supposed to be doing. And it ends up being a situation where you get, as a performer or as a fan or as somebody who's trying to invest in professional wrestling or any other kind of industry, you get incredibly frustrated. And obviously, from my particular perspective, I went, wrestling is going to have to do some things that the wrestlers, the personalities, the fans, and everybody in between is not going to like doing. Obviously, I don't think people expected me to talk about regulation on an April Fool's Day stream, but here we are. I know. I think the alternate title of this episode, in hindsight, living under a boulder is understandable, is really going to be really much a nice alternate title to all of this. In hindsight, living under a boulder is understandable. Obviously, I haven't really talked about the main promotions yet, and yes, they do certainly have a lot of allegations against them for certain performers, but the problem is legal liability, allegations, and letting the due process play out before even remotely considering talking about them. I'll probably mention that wrestler has had allegations against them before covering their matches, obviously. because I still have to cover their matches. I cover shows on a match-by-match basis. It's not a situation where I can skip matches unless absolutely necessary. Of course, in most cases, it's because of the fact I end up skipping on matches because the performer absolutely bores me. Not just because of the fact that they're a massive creep. You know, it ends up being something like that. Because I get bad vibes about people. And I trust my judgments and I trust my vibes. And surprise, surprise, those vibes have ended up right about 100% of the time on most occasions. And I'll say this again, I hate being right. So that's my speech about the whole situation regarding professional wrestling in 2020, 2021. The other stuff, of course, talking about the fact that the pandemic caused a lot of pain to wrestlers. Some wrestlers ended up getting cut by the major promotions, which ended up making a couple of awards list for the worst promotional tactic of 2020. It was in a dead heat with Speaking Out, actually. It was in a dead heat with the wrestlers who had been exposed by the Speaking Out movement. For who was going to take the top spot, but WWE, of course, being WWE, had to take that top spot. They ended up cutting wrestlers during the pandemic, which a lot of people really didn't like. Really didn't like that move. Oh, boy. So, obviously, WWE, I expect them to do satanic moves, okay? It's run by freaking Satan. Of course he's going to do the most evil things imaginable. Okay, that's what Vince does. If Vince does anything different, I end up being disturbed. If he does, like, moments of charity or acts of kindness, I think that the world's about to break in two when he does that. Then, of course, so we have WWE. Right now, their product is about as average as you can get. It services the lowest common denominator fan. It services a fan that wants to be in this position of, you know, just watching a wrestling product on national TV, and they're not really particularly happy with them all elite boys and girls, and that they want to just stick with WWE as far as the wrestling product is concerned, and that's fine. That's what they're doing. That's their judgment. And so when I look at this situation from my perspective, I go, why did you guys let go of George Barrios? Oh, we're going to mention that. We're going to mention George Barrios, of course. George Barrios ended up getting released by WWE along with Michelle Wilson in late February, early March of 2020. And that's where I truly think that the massive decline with WWE has begun, because they got rid of the one person who seemed to be keeping the wheels on for the company. And it was a situation where, okay, what's going on here? Why did you just cut a guy who is... Why did you just cut a guy who is basically the main reason as to why your company has been functional for the last several years? And he lasted longer than any other executive in WWE history. He is more charismatic. He's more charismatic than the charismatic Enigma. Somehow managing to survive that long in that culture. And, of course, the loss of Bingo Nights. That was another tragic thing that happened. You know, I say that with legitimacy there. Losing Bingo Nights was just like... It just doesn't make the pressers as interesting. But the pressers are still interesting. So, obviously, I expect WWE to not be a company that does charitably good things unless absolutely necessary. You know, unless their interns are getting threatened being dunked in a vat of molten chocolate by their sponsors, then they're not going to really do the kind of things that you would expect them to do. Um, as far as wrestling is concerned with WWE, I will still obviously be looking at their product because I managed to fix a technical issue. I switched over to Peacock and watched part of Fastlane. The last two matches I watched actually were the Alexa Bliss versus Randy Orton Funhouse match, and the Deranged Lawn Gnome Daniel Bryan versus the Tribal Chief Roman Reigns. Oh, that was a fun match. That was really fun. It reminded me why I like professional wrestling, because of seeing these two competitors go at it against one another. Two performers that I had regularly talked about overall, and seeing these two individuals have this great wrestling match and the main event of Fastlane before that insane vampire hobo Edge came in and decked them both with a chair. Like, that reminded me why I like wrestling. Seeing people from the local wrestling scene debut for a big promotion like AEW reminded me how much I liked wrestling. And seeing people be generally happy that their favorites are getting the opportunities that they hadn't been receiving beforehand, be able to wrestle. I mean, JD Drake is facing off against Darby Allin for the TNT Championship next week. And JD Drake is one of Rev Claire's favorite wrestlers. She really, really likes JD's hostile grappling. And who to blame her? I watched his match on AEW Dark Elevation. I was like, oh, wow, this is a really good wrestler. Really good technical hoss wrestler. I'm like, oh, wow, this is so cool. And this is just so cool. And even though I've been talking about serious subject matter so far on this live stream, and thank you those who tuned in to watch that segment of the live stream, this has been a really fun show for me to do. This has been a really fun show for me to talk about. Obviously, went on a little bit of tangent, but there was a big reason. There was a big reason as to why I basically dropped my coverage for the most part. But I'm not one of those people who says, oh, it's hopeless, I'm not going to be doing anything anymore. I'm going to just go sit in the corner and mope. I'm not like that. I go, alright, what is fixable? What is fixable about this situation? And surprise, surprise, you find out that there's a lot of stuff that's fixable. You just have to be smart enough to realize it. Smart enough and savvy enough to realize it and go, okay, this is fixable. This is certainly really fixable. And I'm one of those souls who isn't afraid to tangle with some really big monsters in order to do that. Because if you've ever known me before, and for those of you who have been introduced to me for the very first time, I am really kind, very nice, but I do not put up with BS at all. If I see nonsensical, insane behavior being done by people I know, they will find out just how vocal I am about it. Or, even better, when I don't say anything or lift a finger at all, but I still, with my actions, mind you, my actions, still do something to basically express that what you're doing is the wrong thing, and I'm going to stop you from doing something incredibly insane and dangerous that's going to cause you harm and everybody else harm around you. But yeah, I got my streaming software taken care of. I have my headset. I have my microphone. I got my voice back to a level where I can actually talk. I've been able to like professional wrestling matches again. I've been able to watch professional wrestling matches. this, like I said, this is a completely unscripted show. This is not a show that has any kind of scripting to it. And it allows me to showcase the raw emotion because there are times I think that people have thought of me as being very robotic and very, very laid back, as it were. It's not like that in this particular case. Obviously, there's frustration, but there's also joy and happiness in seeing people that I know personally. And that's the important thing. I know people personally. I've been friends with them for years. Okay? Like I said, if they do something wrong, they're certainly getting called out for it. This is not a situation where I will end up enabling somebody because of their bad behavior. Oh no, you should see my track record. Ask anybody who's crossed me before, and they will tell you in no uncertain terms, do not cross Fizzy. Do not attract his attention. Do not make him annoyed at you. Do not make him upset at you. You will find out the hard way just how I can be your best friend. I can be basically like Spinell from Steven Universe. I can be your very best friend, and I will be legitimately your best friend. You do something to betray that trust that I've put in you, that faith, that little bit of faith I put in people, oh, you will find out that I can be your very worst enemy as well. I can be your very worst enemy as well. And I don't play by the social media norms that these grade school children do with people. Just letting you know that in advance, because I don't do grade school tactics. I'm an adult. And I will handle this problem or this situation like an adult would. Not like some child lost in their pro wrestling fantasy world. Who's hoping and praying that their tantrum will make me do something reckless against them. When they're facing against somebody who reads The Art of War and has it by his bedside. Yes, The Art of War by Sun Tzu. I have my alt account, and it says, and this is a quote, has a copy of The Art of War by Sun Tzu on his desk. Or on the desk at this point. And I think that people underestimate. Let's do a little tangent here. I've heard people over the years talk about wrestling Twitter as if it's the worst possible thing imaginable. Like it's some kind of horrifically evil thing that exists in some primordial mass or ooze. And that, for me, is simply not the case. My Twitter account, at Fizzpatrick14, by the way, if you want to go look at it, it's Fizpatrick 14, is a very controlled, very substance-fueled environment where I talk about the slice of life stuff that I do on the occasion. And one of those things that I have been doing to talk about a lighthearted topic, obviously after the heaviness of speaking out, is been doing games, video games. I hadn't really been doing any kind of video game related projects over the last year or so. And because I hadn't been doing video game projects over the last year or so, I felt like I'm not really doing anything, unfortunately. What exactly do I need to be doing? Well, so I started, luckily found, via my thrifting finds, and I post every week on the Twitter account my thrift store finds. And this is to encourage people that, hey, there's stuff out here that's, that you can get for very cheap that will that provide people with enjoyment. You can find happiness by finding something, like an autobiography about baseball or other things of substance And, it's a situation where I went, okay, this provides some joy for people who are right now struggling with their entire world collapsing around them. Whether it be their fantasy world in professional wrestling being completely destroyed because of some monsters, or life going outside in the world right now, where everything seems to be conflict 24/7, 365 days of the year, I go, okay, I'll post these video game things. And I've gotten a lot of very positive responses from people about that. That it gives them a welcome break from the proverbial sadness and drudgery of their timelines. That, hey, Fizz found a pocket calculator. That's cool. That's really cool. And I know that sounds really minor, but in the context of the world right now, little minor joys like that can actually be a really big boost to people when they are in situations of adversity and hardship. And trust me, as somebody who's dealt with a lot of adversity in his life, I can certainly say that is definitely a positive to have when you're in these situations. Overall, doing that and curating my Twitter timeline as well as I do, you might have noticed I only follow 32 accounts on the Twitter at this point. And one of those accounts currently is deceased. That would be Brody Lee, who, side story, Mr. Lee actually asked me in 2019 about the charity work that my family does in Uganda for the Andy Kine Heart Foundation. It is a charity in Uganda. It is 100% legitimate. It has multiple verifications. Heck, my mother made sure that they got 6 different verifications from several different pastors and several different health and aid organizations. They are a 100% legitimate charity, and we sponsor a child in Uganda. I told this story beforehand, but we sent out some wrestling t-shirts, and this is how it got Mr. Lee's attention. Beast, Super Beast, one of the wrestlers who competes in the regional area, messaged me and said, hey, Mr. Brody Lee wants to talk with you about your charity stuff. I'm like, oh, and because of the fact that I had my Twitter settings the way I did, where I didn't have direct messages set up, I was like, he wants me to follow him and message him with the information. I'm like, okay, I can do that. So I was like, my first reaction was like, oh, what have I done to attract the attention of one of these big, major superstar wrestlers? But this is the thing that Mr. Lee did in his life. He would do stuff for charitable organizations. And because of the fact that I had a really positive reputation of being somebody who was trying to encourage a lot of very positive behavior in the Western New York area, in the wrestling scene over here, it's alongside the charity stuff. So I gave him the contact information, I thanked him, and went about my week very professional. I don't get distracted by fame. That's an important thing that people need to realize about me, is I don't get distracted by fame. I remember somebody asking on their timeline a couple weeks ago, who's the most famous follower that you have? I'm like, doesn't really matter to me how famous my followers are. If they enjoy my content and if they enjoy what I do, then that's more worth it to me than any kind of how famous they actually are. I mean, I did butterflies for Hunter's Hope back in 2003 when we ran a butterfly business. It was more important to me to do that butterfly release than it was for any kind of fame or recognition. And what ended up happening is, and this is actually tangibly relevant to the show I'll be talking about tomorrow, the area where we released the butterflies was in Salamanca. And if you see Eastern Tiger Swallowtails in Salamanca, chances are they're from that original brood that was released in 2003 that connected with the mountain swallowtails that lived in the area. And that area used to be filled with swallowtails until the 1950s, 60s when they were spraying for gypsy moths. Um, and if you go through that area today, you'll run across hundreds of eastern tiger swallowtails alongside the road flying. And it is a really awesome sight to see these butterflies fly from one place to the other. And be able to watch as they fly into alongside the roads and the mountains. And I probably will talk about that on the next show that I will be doing. Let's see here. So far, the stream is going well. I've actually been talking for well over an hour at this point, which I was not expecting to do. Let's see here. Looking at the timer here, I'm currently at 138, but I know that that's incorrect because I know that I started the clock on this thing earlier. But I really did feel like I did a stream that's currently reduced video or audio quality. That might be due to network connections. Okay, so just making sure that that's work. Okay, so yeah, so overall that the thing is interesting about this situation is that yeah, I don't care about particularly fame, but what happened is that over 2020 I had myself a really good year, and that's another thing I feel kind of bad about. I actually had a really good year in 2020. I had a very productive year in 2020. I got through a lot of injuries, a lot of ailment issues that I had been dealing with, just little minor niggles here and there, and that just made things difficult. And just feeling really good. And at this moment in time, I have plans to do a couple of different shows. So obviously I should be talking about here is what exactly have I got planned for the future of Wacky World Wrestling. Well, obviously, tomorrow I will be doing another stream that will be a little bit more focused than this one. This is just a nice, relaxing, calm stream to get myself back into the realm of podcasting, and I ended up ranting about just how ridiculous everything has gotten over the last year and a half in pro wrestling, where everything seems to either be falling apart or, going completely insane. And just looking at the situation from the perspective of, okay, what is going on now? You end up getting dragged down by all that stuff, but it's something that needs to be said and something that needs to be looked at. And you look at the situation as a professional adult and you go, all right, we're doing this now. We're going to change things up. We're going to do things differently. And you go from there and you see what happens. Because burning everything down is not the solution. Trying to rebuild and reconstruct things better than they were before, to me at least, seems like the best solution. It's a balanced solution. You have to go modular. You have to go modular compared to one direction or the other. You can't just do, random crazy nonsense and thinks that it will work. But yeah, this has just been such a fantastic stream so far, because this is my first time doing this with live streaming. This is the first time I've done a live stream on my own channel on my own accord since 2019. So obviously I got to thank everybody for like I said beforehand, want to thank Shooting the Breeze, Senju and the Old Man for dragging me into modern technology with Discord and the OBS software to be able to stream. And obviously the question would be is, And I'll say this right now, I am staying independent. That's important. I am staying independent, guys. I am not moving away from my independent designation on the podcasting stuff. Okay? I will post to my friends, both on Twitter and on Cage Side, that I'm doing shows, but at the same time, I am staying independent. I'm not joining a podcasting collective. I have joined up with a couple of different ventures that require me to stay independent, which, again, and I would be doing that anyway because for me, being independent has been, since 2017 or so, has been, well, I've always been independent. Since 2013. I've always been an independent hobby podcaster at heart, and realistically, Fizzy's Wacky World of Wrestling has always been that. It has been an experimental podcast that lives and breathes by the creative willpower that I have to do really interesting, fascinating, creative content. And while oftentimes it ends up being not exactly perfect or to my liking to an extent, I feel like this show, it's been okay. It's been a good show. I'll definitely take a look at it again and see how it actually turned out compared to what I expected it to be. But I'd love to hear your thoughts and what you thought of this show, this return to the promised land of streaming. It is 9:31 p.m. in the evening, and I'm just checking on here, just checking on my settings here. With let's see here, yep, yep, and let's see here. Okay, so let's see. All right. So let's see here. That's interesting. So right now, I'm just looking at my settings right at this moment. So far, the stream looks like it's doing really well. And like I said, I'd like to hear your thoughts about the whole experience of this particular show, if you want to. And let's see here. And at the moment, um, it's been an hour plus since I started this particular show, and overall, it has been really fun to be doing this show with you folks. Again, I had missed doing live streams so much. Um, you folks have no idea. It's been a very long time since I've done one of these particular live streams, and just to be able to do this has been so fun and so enjoyable for me to do. Um, so the next show up is going to be a regularly scheduled show for Friday, and we are bringing a special guest along with us for this particular edition of Wacky World of Wrestling. Episode 65 will be tomorrow. Yes, tomorrow. I'm doing a show on tomorrow. I'm going to be doing a show tomorrow if everything works out the way I expected it to, or, does. And that person in question will be somebody who's been on the show beforehand for the Take a Katana to the Thanksgiving Turkey episode of Wacky World of Wrestling. That would be MDS. If, of course, card is always subject to change. But overall, once again, this has been a real nice stream to get back into the world of streaming professional wrestling and streaming everything. So right now we are at an hour and 33 minutes and 39 seconds. I think that is a good cutoff point for this particular show because I've been at this for over an hour plus. And normally I don't mean to do shows that are that long, but we had a lot of topics to talk about on this show in this sort of slapjash, building up a new streaming related thing. And once again, I like to thank everybody who who's been watching or is going to watch this particular episode of Wacky World of Wrestling. Thank you so much for joining in. You can follow me on social media at Fizzpatrick 14. I mentioned it beforehand, but I'll mention it in the formal way now. That's Fizzpatrick 14. That's Fizzpatrick 14 at William Fitzpatrick. Um, you'll know my account when you see it. It's very fizzy. It's very me overall, and so this show would not be possible without the support that. I'll once again thank the people who take her and send you for basically dragging me into the modern age with the technology. George of Two Guys One Sport for being incredibly supportive during my. I wished him good luck with his show this week because unfortunately I had to do this show around the time that they were doing theirs. So and I don't normally do shows around other podcasting shows, but unfortunately, the opportunity to do a show on April Fools of all days just was too good to pass up. So, apologies in advance, guys. But George, thank you for wishing me good luck on my return venture to podcasting. I know how much you've respected me as the Godfather because that was one of the shows that I helped bring together on a random Cage Side Speaks of all things. Um, the great Sean Reuter, as always, for his, bringing me in with Cage Side Speaks. Same with Kevin K.M. Tierney. The emotional support that happened when that was a thing that I did when I was a co-moderator. As always, my long-time friend, Rev. Claire Elizabeth, her support for the shows and creative ventures that I do. One of the wrestlers who I have been, really supportive of because of their economic ventures into professional wrestling, Mr. Brandon Thurston of WrestleNomics, who has been the wrestling MVP of 2020 as far as I'm concerned, because the economic work that WrestleNomics has done for people to understand the world of professional wrestling and what changes need to be made in the world of professional wrestling, his very opinionated articles about professional wrestling, are just such good reads that I highly recommend that you look at these articles and you see what these are. And obviously, everybody else who has been supportive of the show over the last several years that I have done Wacky World of Wrestling. A couple other announcements I'm going to make here. I have a Teespring store available as well that I opened back in August. I will have a link in the over on my Birdthing account for you to check out if necessary. Now, I know it's a pandemic, and I know that money has been very tight for people. Again, you don't have to purchase anything right away or anything like that. Oh, yeah, that's right. And also, another person who's been highly supportive of this channel has been Kane A. Knight, who has been very encouraging of my podcasting efforts. Absolutely loves the shows every time that he watches one. It has been a really fun experience for him. Every time that I would complain about the Abominable Strowman or Ryback or anybody else that comes into this general vicinity. But this show today was basically going to be it's sort of a test stream and also sort of a, hi folks, I'm back. I'm back doing podcasting. I'm back doing podcasting. I'm doing something I really enjoy doing, and I'm glad to be back. I'm glad to be here. Let's continue the Wacky tomorrow. Same time, same channel, same place at 8 p.m. EST. That time around, I will have MDS on board for the show. If card is subject to change, obviously. But overall, folks, thank you for tuning in if you are going to tune in for this particular show. And if not, I'll see you tomorrow for the next edition of Fizzy's Wacky World of Wrestling. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and I will see you on the next stream. So have a good day or night. This has been episode 64, Night of the Living Fools. Fizzy's Wacky World of Wrestling, signing off. Bye, folks!